Today, we're going to dive into the profound and honestly pretty counterintuitive story of a man named Nectarios. His journey is really going to challenge everything you think you know about trauma, about family, and what it actually means to heal.
Yeah, let that sink in for a second. That single, shocking idea is the heart of this entire explainer. We're going to unpack how a life that started with what looks like abandonment could become the very source of an immense, unshakable strength.
So our story starts in a small village in Crete. Nectarios was born prematurely in Germany, and at just 11 months old, he was sent to live with his elderly grandparents. You see, the German climate was just too harsh for his fragile health.
And right away, we hit the first huge paradox of his life. While the neighbors would whisper, "Oh, the poor thing," Nectarios felt the exact opposite of pitied. To the world, he was this abandoned orphan, but in his mind, he was living in an absolute paradise.
Now, this paradise, it wasn't about material things. It was built on the unconditional love of two people already in their 70s. He had total freedom to just roam the village, cataloging birds' nests, creating these imaginary worlds. And crucially, he was completely accepted for exactly who he was. Think about it. In a traditional Cretan village, he was never once scolded for playing with dolls or just being himself.
But of course, that perfect, idyllic world couldn't last forever. When he turned 13, his parents, who were basically strangers he'd only seen a handful of times, came back from Germany to take him, to bring him into the new family they had built without him.
That reunion he'd been taught to dream about, the one with clean sheets and a modern house, it was nothing like the fantasy. It was an immediate, brutal shock. He says he felt like he was violently ripped from his perfect world and just thrown straight into a nightmare.
And it started instantly. We're talking within minutes of meeting them. The criticism began. His mother, especially, started picking apart the very core of who he was. The way he walked, the way he talked, suddenly everything was just wrong.
Every natural gesture, every part of his expressive personality that had been so nurtured in the village was now a flaw. It was something that had to be stamped out, corrected, and fixed.
And then came this word from his father, a homophobic slur Nectarios had never, ever heard before. In the accepting world of his grandparents, his identity was never a question, but in his parents' house, it was the very first weapon they used against him.
This awful experience, this rupture, would actually lead to another, even more counterintuitive part of his story. His journey just keeps defying expectations, especially when we start talking about something as universal as grief and loss.
For most of us, loss, especially the death of a loved one, it's one of the most painful things in life. It's a source of sorrow, this void that feels totally impossible to fill.
But for Nectarios, loss showed up in a completely different way. Two devastating deaths didn't break him. Instead, they became his moments of liberation. They were his escape hatch.
So get this. First, when he was 16, his beloved grandfather tragically took his own life. But in the middle of that unbelievable heartbreak, an unexpected door opened. Nectarios could finally leave his parents' hell to go care for his grieving grandmother. Then, decades later, his father's death during the pandemic brought a different kind of release. In their very last conversation, just 8 hours before he passed, his father finally gave him the words he'd wanted to hear his whole life. "Yes, I love you."
Armed with that unexpected closure, Nectarios was finally free to begin the really hard work of healing. He started actively rebuilding his own identity, turning to therapy to understand the deep wounds of his past. Now, what's so crucial here is that his path wasn't about forcing forgiveness or faking some happy family reunion. No, it was about fundamentally changing his own perspective. He dealt with his anxiety, he learned to see his mother not as this all-powerful figure, but as a damaged person, and he radically changed his own expectations. This led to a huge breakthrough. He came to see his mother as being sort of like the wind. Her opinions were constantly changing. They held no real substance. And once he truly internalized that, her words just lost their power. He could just let them fly right by without doing any harm.
Another massive moment happened after his father's death. He found out that his siblings, the ones he always thought were the favorites, had the exact same complaints. They felt neglected too. And in that moment, that lifelong burden he carried of being the family's one single problem, it just evaporated. So all of this work, the therapy, the reframing, the release, it led him right back to where we started, to that astonishing idea that his parents' absence was in fact a gift. He completely flipped the script. He transformed the entire narrative of his life. The story was no longer, "my parents left me." It became,
My parents' absence forced me to become completely self-reliant. He turned his greatest trauma into the very bedrock of his character.
And the result of this whole journey? He now proudly describes himself as 100% self-made. With absolutely no help from anyone, he built a life, a career, successful businesses, and that independence, which was born directly from neglect, has become his greatest source of pride.
Nectarios' story is just such a powerful testament to this question. It suggests that, yeah, the pain is real, absolutely. But the story we build around that pain is ultimately our choice. With a ton of internal work, what was once a source of shame can be transformed into a source of power.
And in the end, this is what it all boils down to. Nectarios believes the biggest lie we are ever told is that people don't change. His entire life is proof that they can. He shows us that we have the power to redefine our past, and in doing that, build a future that is entirely of our own making.